I got back from Jacksonville on a Tuesday afternoon to find a minivan I didn't recognize, parked in my spot in the driveway, a pair of women's sandals on my front porch, and the smell of someone else's cooking coming through the screen door I'd left locked when I left 8 days ago. I sat in my truck for a moment with the engine running, telling myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe my daughter Nicole had a friend visiting. Maybe there was something wrong with a pipe and a repairman had been called. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life in construction management, which means I've learned not to jump to conclusions before I've assessed the full situation. Walk the perimeter, gather the facts, then act. I turned off the engine and went inside. My living room had been rearranged. The armchair my late wife Carol had reupholstered herself 3 years before the cancer took her was shoved against the far wall to make room for an air mattress that was still inflated, sheets tangled on top of it. 2 suitcases sat open near the fireplace. A woman's coat was draped over the back of the couch I'd had since 2009. On my coffee table, the one Carol and I picked out at an estate sale in Savannah, sat a half-eaten bag of chips, a TV remote that wasn't mine, and a coffee mug with someone else's lipstick on the rim. "Hello?" I called out. Footsteps from the kitchen. My daughter appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Behind her was a woman I recognized as my son-in-law, Derek's mother, Patty, a small woman in her late 50s who I'd met exactly 4 times at family events and who had never once looked at me like she was comfortable in my presence. She was wearing an apron, my apron, the one that said Grill Sergeant that my buddy Frank had given me for my 60th birthday. "Dad, you're back early?" Nicole's voice had that particular quality it gets when she's been caught doing something and is trying to decide whether to lie or not. I've known that voice since she was 9 years old and told me the broken lamp fell on its own. I wasn't early. I was exactly on time. I'd told her I'd be home Tuesday. "What's going on, Nicole?" Derek's mom and his sister needed a place to stay for a little while. She said it quickly, like speed would make it easier to swallow. Just temporarily. Becca's going through a hard time with her boyfriend, and Patty's building has a mold situation they're dealing with. I looked at the air mattress. I looked at the suitcases. How long have they been here? Since Thursday. Thursday was 5 days after I'd left for Jacksonville, meaning they hadn't even waited a week. And you didn't ask me. We knew you'd say no. That was Derek's voice. He came through from the hallway, hands in his pockets, with that particular expression he wears when he's decided he's already won an argument before it starts. My son-in-law is 37 years old, broad-shouldered, makes decent money managing a auto parts warehouse. He's never been openly rude to me in 6 years of marriage to my daughter. He doesn't need to be. He has subtler ways of making his point. It was an emergency situation, Harold. What were we supposed to do? You were supposed to call me. I set my bag down by the door. This is my house. My name is on the deed. Yours is not. We live here too. You live here because I allow it. There's a difference. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You contribute $400 a month toward utilities in a house where the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, and every repair comes out of my pocket. And I accepted that arrangement because Nicole is my daughter, and I wanted to help you both get ahead. I didn't agree to open my home to your entire extended family without being consulted. Patty had retreated back into the kitchen. I could hear a third person upstairs, footsteps, a door closing. The sister, presumably, in my house, using my bathroom, sleeping in a room I had not offered to anyone. Where exactly are they sleeping? I asked Nicole. She didn't answer right away. Nicole, Becca's in the guest room. She paused. Patty's been using your study. We moved the daybed in there. My study, the room I'd converted from a bedroom into a workspace when Carol got sick, so I could be home more while still being able to work. The room with Carol's books still on the shelf, her painting of the coast of Maine still on the wall, her reading chair still in the corner that I had never moved because I wasn't ready to move it. Someone had moved a daybed into that room without my permission and was sleeping in it, surrounded by my dead wife's things. I picked my bag back up. I'm going to go check into the Hampton Inn on Route 9, I said. When I come back tomorrow morning, I want Patty and Becca's things packed and loaded. They need to be gone before noon. If they're not, I'll call Tom Withers and we'll let the legal system sort out the definition of unauthorized occupancy. Tom had been my attorney for 22 years. And Derek, I'd suggest you spend this evening thinking carefully about the conversation we're going to have tomorrow about you and Nicole's living situation, because that conversation is long overdue. Derek stared at me. You're being dramatic. I'm being clear. There's a difference. I looked at my daughter. Noon tomorrow, Nicole. I mean it. She was already crying a little. She gets that from Carol, the way the tears come before the words do. I used to find it heartbreaking, standing there with my overnight bag and someone else's apron hanging in my kitchen. I found it exhausting. The Hampton Inn was clean and generic, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before I could settle my thoughts enough to do anything useful. I'd driven down to Jacksonville because my friend Frank had a stroke 8 days ago. Frank, who'd been my closest friend for 31 years, who I'd worked with on 3 different projects, who'd given me the grill sergeant apron and been at Carol's funeral and called me every Sunday for years just to check in. He was in a rehab facility now, working on getting his left side to cooperate again. His wife Ellen had been running on fumes, and I'd gone down to help manage the logistics. Meals, insurance, paperwork, driving their youngest to school. I'd done what needed doing because Frank would have done the same for me, and because that's what real friendship looks like. I came home to this. My phone buzzed. Nicole. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it. Dad, I'm sorry, but Patty had nowhere to go, and you weren't here. And Derek said you wouldn't mind for a few weeks, just a few weeks. Please call me back. A few weeks. Not a night, not a weekend. A few weeks. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. I called Tom instead. You on a new case, or just checking in? He asked. Tom answers every call like he's already slightly amused. I explained the situation. He went quiet in that way he does when he's thinking through implications. All right, he said finally. Patty and the sister, they're Derek's family. Not party to any arrangement with you? Correct. I've never had any agreement with them. And Nicole and Derek haven't paid any rent beyond the utility contribution? Correct. Then we're talking unauthorized occupancy. If they don't leave voluntarily, we can file. But Harold, give them the morning. If they're out by noon, like you said, you won't need paperwork. And if they're not, then you call me at 12:01 and we get the ball rolling. I slept better than I expected, which probably says something about what my sleep had been like for the past 6 years with Derek and Nicole in my house. I woke up early, made coffee in the little machine they had in the room, and sat with it in the quiet thinking about what Frank would say about all this. Frank, who had told me 3 years ago, gently but clearly, that I was making a mistake letting Nicole and Derek stay so long. You're not doing her any favors, Hal, he'd said. We were sitting on his back porch, middle of summer. You're just delaying the part where she figures out how to be an adult. I told him he was being too hard on her. She'd had a rough few years after Carol died. She needed stability. Frank had nodded and let it go, because that's the kind of friend he was. And he'd been right, and I'd been wrong. And here I was, in a Hampton Inn, at 6:30 in the morning, because I hadn't listened. I got to my house at 9. Patty's minivan was still in the driveway. I went inside. Patty and Becca were in the kitchen, both of them in the kind of careful, polite posture that people get when they know they've overstayed. Nicole was at the table with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Derek was not visible. Where is he? I asked Nicole. He went to work. Of course he did. Leave the women to deal with the fallout while he put in a 9 to 5. Are your things packed? I asked Patty directly. She had the grace to look ashamed. We'll be out by noon. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Harold. She said my name carefully, like it was a formality she wasn't sure she was allowed to use. I appreciate that, Patty. I don't have anything against you personally. Becca, the sister, was younger, maybe 28, and had the look of someone who'd been crying and had decided to be angry about it instead. She said nothing to me, just stared at her phone. I went to my study. Someone had made the daybed neatly, pillows stacked. Carol's reading chair had been moved 6 inches to accommodate it. Her books were still on the shelf, undisturbed, and the painting of Maine was still on the wall. And for some reason, that was worse. All of it untouched, but still somehow violated, the whole room rearranged around an intruder and then put back like it hadn't been. I stood there for a long time. Then I went to my bedroom, changed out of my travel clothes, and came back downstairs to wait. Patty and Becca were loaded and out by 11:40. Patty shook my hand at the door and said again that she was sorry. I thanked her for leaving promptly. The minivan backed down the driveway and was gone. Nicole was still at the kitchen table. "Your father-in-law," I said, pulling out the chair across from her. "Derek's dad. He's been out of the picture since Derek was a teenager, if I remember right." "Yeah. He lives in Arizona." So when Derek decided his mother and sister needed emergency housing, the option he chose was my house. Not a hotel. Not a conversation with me. Not asking his own brother, does he have a brother? A half-brother in Atlanta. My house. Without asking. I let that sit for a moment. "Nicole, you're 35 years old." "I know how old I am, Dad." "You've been living here for 6 years. You and Derek have been working full-time for all 6 of those years. You don't pay rent. You don't pay taxes. You don't pay insurance. I buy most of the food and pay every utility beyond the $400 a month, which doesn't cover half of what this house actually costs to run." I watched her face. "What are you doing with your money?" "We're saving for a house." "Are you?" She looked up. "Because if you were genuinely saving, even aggressively, in 6 years you'd have enough for a down payment on a modest house in this area. You'd have it and then some. So I'd like to understand where the money is actually going, because I've been telling myself the story about saving for a house for 6 years, and I'm realizing I've never asked to see any evidence of it." "That's Dad. That's insulting." "Is it wrong?" She was quiet. "Last year Derek bought a truck," I said. "New. F-150, fully loaded. What does that go for? 60,000? Before that, you took a vacation to Portugal. You've got new furniture in your bedroom upstairs, I noticed when I moved some things to set up the air conditioning unit in August. None of that is saving for a house. We were saving and then things came up. Things come up for everyone, Nicole. The difference is that when things come up for people who pay rent, they have to make hard choices. When things come up for you, you don't, because I'm covering the floor of your life. You don't feel the weight because I'm underneath it." I kept my voice level. I'd been thinking about how to say this for a long time. Longer, maybe, than I'd admitted to myself. "That ends now." She put her coffee mug down. "What does that mean?" "It means you and Derek have 30 days to find your own place. I'll help with the first and last month's deposit if you need it. That's my final act of cushioning, and after that, you're on your own. In 30 days, I'll be changing all the locks and your key won't work." "Dad, you can't just—" "This is my house, Nicole. My name and only my name is on the deed. I can, and I am." I stood up. "I'm going to go call Tom and ask him to draw up the formal notice. I'd prefer not to go that route, but if Derek decides to be difficult about it, I want the paperwork ready." She was crying in earnest now. "Where are we supposed to go?" "That's a reasonable question, and it's one I'd like you and Derek to answer together as adults. You're both employed. You have options. I trust you to find one." I went to my study and I closed the door, and I sat in Carol's reading chair for the first time in I don't know how long, and I thought about her and about what she would say. Carol was more patient than me, but she had a spine like a steel cable when it mattered. She would have started this conversation 3 years ago, maybe 4. She would have done it with more warmth than I was managing right now, but she'd have done it. She wouldn't have waited until a stranger was sleeping in her chair. I called Tom, then I called Frank's cell. He answered on the 4th ring, his speech slightly slower than before, but still unmistakably Frank. "Hal, tell me something good." "I might have something interesting," I said. He listened while I told him the whole thing. When I got to the part about the study, he was quiet for a moment. "Carol's chair," he said. "Carol's chair. Good thing you went home when you did." He paused. "You doing okay?" "I'm doing what needs doing." "That's not what I asked." "I know. I'm okay, Frank. How's the left hand?" "Waving at you from Florida." A small laugh. "You did the right thing, Hal. You know that. I knew it the way you know that setting a bone is the right thing even while it hurts like hell." Derek got home at 6:15. I was in the kitchen making dinner, a proper dinner. My kitchen, my stove, nothing but the sound of the evening news from the living room. He stood in the doorway in his work clothes, looking at me like he was surprised I was there, which was its own kind of statement. "We need to talk," he said. "We do," I agreed. "Sit down." He sat, reluctantly, the way he always does, like sitting when he didn't choose to sit is some kind of concession. Derek is not a stupid man. That's always been part of the problem. He knows exactly what he's doing. He just counts on no one calling him on it. "Nicole told me about the 30 days, he said. "Good." Saves me repeating it. "Harold, we can't find a decent apartment in 30 days. That's not realistic. People do it regularly when the alternative is homelessness. You're not facing homelessness. You're facing the mild inconvenience of having to function like adults." I stirred the pot on the stove. "Start looking tonight. If you need my help understanding what you can afford based on your income, I'm happy to walk through the numbers with you." There it is. He leaned back. There's that condescension. I turned and looked at him. "Derek, you moved your mother and sister into my house without my knowledge or consent while I was 800 miles away helping a sick friend. You made a decision about my property as if your opinion was the one that mattered. And now you want to talk to me about condescension." He didn't say anything. "I don't dislike you," I said. "I want to be honest with you about that. You're not a bad man. But you've been a bad guest. And you've let my daughter be a bad guest. And I should have addressed this years ago instead of waiting until you tried to run me out of my own study." "We weren't trying to run you out. What would you call it?" He opened his mouth, closed it. 30 days, I said. "I mean it." That night I heard them upstairs. Voices low, but not quiet enough. I've lived in this house for 28 years, and I know every sound it makes, including the particular frequency of an argument that's trying to stay below audible. I couldn't make out words. I didn't try to. I watched the news, read for a while, went to bed in my own room with my own locks on the door, and slept. 3 days later, I found out about the money. It wasn't something I went looking for. I was at the hardware store picking up weather stripping for the back door, a task that had been on my list since August, and that I was finally getting to now that I didn't feel like a guest in my own home, and I ran into a woman named Donna Garrett, who lives 4 houses down and has been on the neighborhood association with me for years. Donna has the kind of memory for details that should disqualify her from ever holding a secret. "Harold, I didn't know you were back. How's your friend?" I told her Frank was making progress. "Good, good. And I suppose things are sorted out now with your renters?" I looked at her. "The ones Derek had staying in your place while you were gone." Donna glanced away briefly, recalibrating. "I assumed you knew." "What do you mean? His renters?" She explained what she'd seen. Patty's minivan arriving the day after I left, Becca with a boyfriend who came and went, and one day Donna's voice going, "Careful now," she'd bumped into Patty at the mailbox and they'd had a brief conversation. Patty had mentioned offhandedly that Derek was doing them a favor, letting them use the spare rooms for $800 a month while they got back on their feet. $800 a month. I stood in the hardware store aisle with a roll of weather stripping in my hand and felt something cold and very clear settle into my chest. My son-in-law had been renting out rooms in my house to his own family members and collecting money for it, while I was 800 miles away, and he had not mentioned this detail when I came home and told him to clear them out. "Thank you, Donna," I said. I did know. I just wanted to make sure I had the full picture. I drove home, and I went to Tom. Not the phone, Tom's actual office, because this was the kind of conversation that needed to happen in person across a desk. Tom listened with his hands folded and his reading glasses pushed up on his head, and when I finished, he said, "Do you have any documentation? Texts, emails, Venmo records?" "I don't have access to Derek's accounts." "Does Nicole?" I thought about that. She might. "Here's where you are," Tom said. "Technically, Derek facilitated unauthorized subletting of your property, which he does not own, for profit, without your consent. That has a name, and it's not a good name. Whether you want to pursue it legally is your call. What I'd suggest is that you have a conversation with Nicole private, just you two, and find out what she knew and when. I had that conversation the next evening. Derek was at a softball game, which I knew because Nicole had mentioned it in passing that morning without looking at me, the way she drops information when she wants me to have it without actually giving it to me. I made tea for both of us, the way Carol used to when we needed to talk about something real, and I asked Nicole to sit down, and I told her what Donna had told me, and I asked if it was true. She didn't deny it. That was the thing that got me. She'd had 6 years to get comfortable with not telling the truth to my face. But she sat there with her mother's eyes and couldn't make herself do it. He said it would help cover the costs, she said. That we owed you money anyway, and this would be paying some of it back. He was collecting rent on my house and telling himself it was paying me back. He said, Nicole. I kept my voice soft, the way Carol would have. Did any of that money come to me? She looked at the table. Did you know where the money was going? I thought he was putting it in savings. For the house you're saving for? Yes. And you didn't think to mention to me that your mother-in-law was paying $800 a month to stay in my home. I knew you'd be angry. I'm not angry, I said, which was nearly true. The anger had burned off somewhere around Tom's office, replaced by something slower and more settled. I'm disappointed, which is worse. You're my daughter. I've done everything I could think of to make your life easier since your mother died. And I understand that grief does complicated things to families. And I understand that Derek has influences on how you think about these things. But, Nicole, you are a grown woman. You have your own judgment. At some point you made a choice to let this happen and not tell me. She was crying again. I didn't know how to stop it. You could have called me. He would have. I don't care what he would have done. You are my daughter. You call me. That's the deal. I pushed my tea away. I need you to think carefully about who is making decisions in your life, and whether those decisions are serving you or serving him. She didn't say anything. 28 days, I said. I'll still help with the deposit, because that offer stands and I keep my word. But I want you to spend the next few days thinking about what you actually want your life to look like, because I don't think Derek's version of it is working out very well for you. I went to Tom the next morning and had him add the subletting matter to the eviction paperwork. I wasn't going to pursue it criminally, but I wanted it documented. I wanted Derek to understand that I understood exactly what he'd done and that there were legal words for it. Tom called me at noon. It's filed. They've been served. How did Derek take it? His reaction was not documented in the service. Tom paused. Harold, one other thing I wanted to raise with you. The house. You've had your will reviewed since Carol passed? Not since 2017. Worth thinking about, especially given what's come to light. I'm not telling you what to do, just suggesting you make sure your intentions are clearly reflected. I thought about it for the rest of the day. That evening, I drove to the cemetery for the first time in 3 months. I go less often now than I used to, not because I think about Carol less, but because I've started to feel her less in the cemetery than in the house, in the kitchen where she taught Nicole to cook, in the yard where she planted the hydrangeas that still come up every spring, whether I take care of them properly or not. I stood at her headstone for a while in the early dark and thought about what she'd tell me to do. She'd tell me to be fair and to be clear and not to be vindictive. She'd also tell me that rewarding bad behavior wasn't kindness. She'd been saying versions of that to me for 31 years of marriage. I called Tom from the parking lot. Let's review the will. I want to make sure Frank and his family are accounted for appropriately. And I want to revisit what Nicole's share looks like, given that she's going to need to start standing on her own. I'm not removing her entirely. She's still my daughter, but I want to be thoughtful about what it says. I can have a draft to you by Thursday. Derek came to find me the following Saturday morning. He knocked on my bedroom door, which told me something he'd have walked right in 6 months ago. I opened it, and he stood in the hallway in a way that was different from how he'd stood there 2 weeks ago. Less settled, less certain of the geometry of the house. I want to apologize for the Venmo situation, he said. I should have told you. Yes, I really did plan to put it toward what we owe you. Derek, I don't actually believe that, but I accept the apology. I leaned against the doorframe. Did you find an apartment? We're looking at a place this afternoon. 2-bedroom, decent area, 15 minutes from here. Good. He looked at his hands. Look, I know I overstepped. I know things got. He stopped, started again. Nicole deserves better than what I've put her through with all of this. I know that. I studied him. He was 37 years old, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked it not older, just exactly his age, without the particular confidence he wore like a second skin. I didn't feel sorry for him, but I didn't enjoy this either. Derek, do you want a real conversation, or are you just managing me? A beat. Then, quietly, both probably. At least that was honest. What do you want from me? I want to know if you'll have a relationship with Nicole after this. She's scared she's losing you. Nicole isn't losing me. Nicole is gaining a father who finally started acting like one. I pushed off the door frame. If she does the work, the therapy I'm going to suggest, the honest conversation about her own choices, the actual adult life in an actual apartment she pays for herself, then we will have a stronger relationship than we've ever had. That's what I want. That's what Carol would have wanted. But it doesn't happen while you're all living in my house and I'm underneath the weight of your lives. He nodded slowly. Go look at the apartment, I said. If it's decent, take it. They signed the lease on a Wednesday. Nicole came to tell me in person, which I appreciated. She stood in my kitchen with her hands in her jacket pockets. Mid-October now, and cold enough that we'd had the heat on for a week, and she said, "It's not as nice as this, but it has a good kitchen. Good light. That's what matters in a kitchen." Yeah. She looked around at mine, the butcher block counter Carol picked out, the window over the sink that looks out at the hydrangeas. I was maybe not as helpful as I could have been. When Derek was making decisions, I let things happen that I knew weren't right. I know. I think I was scared that if I pushed back, don't know. I'm going to start seeing someone, a therapist. I moved to her and put my arms around her, and she cried into my shoulder the way she used to when she was 12 and the world had done something unfair to her. I love you, I said. Nothing that happened changes that. I'm angry, and I'm hurt, and I also love you. All of those things are true at the same time. She laughed a little through the crying. Mom used to say that. I know. I learned it from her. Moving day was a Saturday, 3 days before the 30-day deadline. Nicole had borrowed a trailer from a friend, and she and Derek had recruited 2 of his co-workers to help. They were efficient, and I'll give them credit. They were careful with my things. Every box that came down the stairs with their handwriting on it came down slowly. Nothing dragged or dropped. When Derek passed me in the hallway with a load of Nicole's clothes, he made eye contact and nodded. I nodded back. We weren't going to be friends, and I didn't expect it, but we were going to be civil, and that was enough. The last thing down the stairs was the framed print of the Maine coast that had been hanging in their bedroom for 6 years. Carol had bought it on our anniversary trip 20 years ago. It was not theirs. That stays, I said. Derek looked at it, then at me. I know. We just didn't have anywhere to put it down the stairs. He handed it to me. I carried it to my study and hung it back where it had been before Nicole took it off the wall when she moved in and decided the bedroom would be a better spot for it. Back where Carol had chosen to put it, facing her reading chair, so she could look at it while she read. Back where it belonged. Around 4 o'clock, the trailer was packed and the truck was running. Nicole hugged me in the driveway for a long time. Over her shoulder, I could see the hydrangeas. Cut back for winter now, the ground under them bare. Carol had planted those when Nicole was 3 years old. I remember watching from the kitchen window while she knelt in the dirt with her gardening gloves and Nicole toddled around the yard behind her. Come for dinner soon, I said. Just you. Not yet, Derek. Just you. I want to hear how you're settling in. Yeah. She pulled back and wiped her eyes. I'd like that. The truck pulled away. I stood in the driveway until it was gone around the corner, then went inside and walked through the house. Kitchen clean. Guest room empty, ready to be a guest room again instead of a semi-permanent staging area. My study, exactly as I'd left it that morning, Carol's chair, Carol's books, the Maine coast back on the wall. The whole house quiet in a way it hadn't been in years, not empty, quiet, but whole quiet. The way it sounded when Carol and I lived here together and the silence between us was comfortable and chosen. I called Frank. They're gone? He said. Just now. How do you feel? I sat down in Carol's chair. I hadn't done that in a long time, really sat in it, settled into it, let myself be in the room that still had the shape of her in it. I feel like I can breathe, I said. It hurts, but I can breathe. That's the one that counts, Frank said. The breath. I cooked dinner. An actual dinner. Pasta the way Carol used to make it, with the slow-cooked tomatoes from the garden. The garden was fallow now. I'd let it go while I was in Jacksonville, but I'd get it going again next spring. I ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on and the lights all the way up and no one else's schedule to work around. And I thought about Carol and about Frank getting his left hand back and about Nicole signing a lease for the first time in her adult life. There's a thing that happens in structural engineering when a load is finally properly distributed, when the weight that was concentrating in one compromised beam gets spread correctly across the whole system the way it was designed. The structure doesn't collapse. It settles. You can almost hear it, this small sound of things going back to where they were meant to be. That's what the house felt like that night. In January, I got a text from Nicole, a photo of her kitchen, winter light coming through the window she'd mentioned, a pan of something on the stove, and a message that said just, "Good light. You were right." I sent back a thumbs up and then changed it to a heart, because Carol would have said the thumbs up was too stingy, and Carol would have been right. In February, Frank drove up for a weekend. His left hand was mostly back, his speech fully restored, and he sat on my back porch with a beer in each hand and said, "This place looks like it did when I first came here. Before you had guests. 24 years ago," I said. "I remember Carol making that terrible lemon cake. She made it every time you visited." "I know. I ate it every time because she was proud of it." He smiled. "She'd be proud of you." In March, Nicole called and asked if she and Derek could come for dinner. I said yes. I asked her to give me another month first. She understood. We set a date for April and she didn't push about the timing, which told me the therapy was working. I spent a Sunday in late March down at the hydrangeas, clearing the winter debris and working the soil the way Carol used to in this exact spot. My knees weren't happy about it. I did it anyway. There's something about putting your hands in dirt that a 63-year-old man needs occasionally, the reminder that things that go dormant come back, that the work you do in the cold months shows up in the warm ones. The hydrangeas would bloom this summer whether I helped them or not. That was Carol's doing, all those years ago. But I'd be here to see them, in my house, in my kitchen, with my locks on my own door. And that was mine. I wasn't done being a father to Nicole. I wasn't done being someone's guest, at Frank's table, at Paul and Ellen's, at the neighborhood association dinners I'd been skipping for 2 years because I hadn't had the energy for people. I wasn't done building things, or maintaining things, or being useful in the ways I knew how to be useful. I was just done letting love be the same thing as erasure, done letting myself be the floor under someone else's life while my own life went unoccupied, done confusing a wide-open door with a lack of walls. Carol knew the difference. She'd tried to teach me. It took me longer than it should have to learn it, but I was learning. The hydrangeas were going to be beautiful this year. I could already tell.